Mekamit. He didn't know me anything, but he saved me. Spent all night by my side until the ambulance came, shivering, soaked, and smiling like an idiot when I opened my eyes. When I tried to thank him, he just said, "You'd have done the same," but I knew I wouldn't have. I'd stopped being that kind of man long ago. We became friends after that. Owen started helping around the shop fixing things, keeping me company. He was quiet, humble, always humming some tune under his breath. He refused pay at first, so I started giving him whatever odd jobs I could find. Over time, the business came back to life. Maybe it was his steadiness, or maybe it was the simple fact that he cared without asking for anything in return. I remember sitting on a porch with him as the sun dipped low, painting the snow orange. He had a fruitcake in his hands, wrapped in brown paper. My mom used to make these, he said, handing me a slice. People hate fruitcake, but she said it's not about the cake, it's about tradition. It means someone remembered you, even if just once a year. It was terrible, dry, dense, far too sweet. But it made me laugh. For the first time in years. Every Christmas after that, he brought one over. And every year, it got better, not the cake, but the meaning behind it. When Ellen died, the kids came back briefly. The funeral was tense, heavy. They were adults by then, full of judgment and pity. They saw the old truck, the worn clothes, and the man who had become a ghost in their story. They left the next day. No calls, no letters, just polite silence. Wednesday. Through every lonely holiday, every slow winter, every missed birthday, he was there when I sold the shop. He was there when I found out I had pancreatic cancer. And he was there the day I realized my fortune money I didn't even want meant nothing if it didn't go somewhere worthwhile. I thought about my children, how they'd visit only for signatures and documents. How Christmas had become a transaction instead of a memory. And I thought about Owen, who brought me warmth when I had none, so I made the will. I left it all to him, but with one condition. Every year, on Christmas, he must send a fruitcake to my children. A small silistastad mazuredin. Inheritance, but in tradition, in effort, in remembering. Now, in that lawyer's office, my family doesn't understand. They think I've betrayed them. Maybe I have. But as they storm out, shouting about lawsuits and betrayal, the lawyer opens another envelope. Inside, a small fruitcake wrapped in brown paper, with a note written in Owen's careful hand. From your father, with love. Don't forget to smile this Christmas. Mary stares at it for a long time before, whispering. He actually did it, and for the first time in decades, she laughs a soft, broken laugh that sounds You inherited my empire, I said, sliding the envelope across the mahogany table. But you also inherited the $20 million debt that comes with it. Their smiles froze mid-celebration, wine glasses still raised. Fake laughter still echoing off the glass walls of my office. For a moment, no one breathed. They thought this was the day they'd finally taken everything from me. But I'd been preparing for this moment longer than any of them realized. Their victory was a mirage, and the desert ahead was mine to watch them crawl through. 3 years earlier, before betrayal turned my boardroom into a battlefield, I still believed family meant loyalty. My company, Argent Industries, had been my life's work, a logistics and manufacturing powerhouse. I built from a loan to trucks and 20-hour days. My nephew, Ethan, had always been ambitious, the kind of young man who looked at the world like it was a chessboard. I'd mentored him closely. I'd trusted him with everything: financials, client lists, even passwords. Première visite dossier. Warwick Place. Turns out he had as an invitation to take it sooner than I meant. Uncle Don, you've got to modernize, he'd said one evening, perched on the edge of my desk like he owned it already. We can't keep operating like it's the 90s. We need a merger, new investors, maybe even a rebrand. I remember smiling, half amused. You mean you need control? I replied. He laughed, brushing off the jab. You always think I'm out to get you. I'm just trying to make Argent bigger. But I could already see it, the subtle power plays. The whispers among board members, the lunches he arranged without inviting me. He was building alliances, and I was the aging founder, with outdated principles. Still, I let him. I wanted to see how far he'd go. Then came the illness. Amit's truck, but boards I'm in. I stepped back temporarily, appointing Ethan as Interim CEO, the vultures circled fast. My legal advisor, Laura Chun, warned me, Don, they're consolidating power. You need to be careful. I wasn't stupid. I'd spent decades in this business. I didn't build an empire by trusting smiling faces in sharp suits. So while they drew up new contracts and expansion proposals, I drew up something else, a contingency. A masterpiece of corporate structure, so intricate it would take a forensic accountant weeks to untangle. I created subsidiaries within subsidiaries, debt notes tied to shell entities, and cross-guarantees that made ownership look like a prize but carried an invisible weight. My lawyer called it ruthless. I called it insurance. When I recovered, the company had changed. Ethan's face was on the cover of industry magazines, and his speeches were filled with words like innovation and legacy. He introduced new, investors aggressive, impatient types who smelled profit in every corner. They pushed for expansion into international markets, signing contracts faster than our auditors could vet them. I tried to warn them. Debt isn't growth, I told the board during one of our. Love looks like when it asks for nothing in return. That's what I hope to give back to you, some reminder that love can be small, even silly, and still mean the world. Every Christmas, when you open that package, know that it's not about the fruitcake, it's about memory. It's about you. Love always. Dad, the ink had bled a little, as if he'd wept while writing. Daniel's letter was shorter. Read it silently, lips pressed tight. His hands trembled, and though he tried to fold it back carefully, the paper tore slightly near the crease. Mary watched him. What did he say? He didn't answer. He just turned toward the window, eyes unfocused. He said, his voice faltered. He said, I should take care of you, that I always tried to fix things instead of feeling them, and that maybe I'd finally learn how to do both. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the muffled wind outside and the faint hum of the heater. Hush, and Marie said, I don't linked. Who? The stranger. Owen. She looked down at the fruitcake again, still wrapped in that neat brown paper. If he's the one who kept Dad alive long enough to even write these letters, we owe him that much. Daniel frowned, torn between anger and curiosity. And what then? We just thank him for taking everything. Mary gave a small, sad smile. Maybe we just thank him for remembering. The road to Owen Reed's cabin was narrow, flanked by birch trees that clawed at the sky. Snow fell heavier now, and Daniel's SUV slipped a little on the curves. Mary held the map in her lap. Her father's last letter folded between her hands like a fragile relic. Are you sure this is the place? Daniel muttered. Preston gave me the address. Mary said, it's the same one where Dad used to send letters to him. He probably never moved. The cabin appeared suddenly, tucked between the trees like a secret weathered wood, smoke curling from the chimney. A porch-light glowing gold in the gloom. Daniel parking je volonté off. Neither of them moved at first. The air between them was thick with hesitation. Then the door opened. An older man stepped out, tall but slightly hunched, wrapped in a wool coat. His hair was silver now, his beard rough but neat. He looked directly at them. No confusion, no surprise, just quiet understanding. You must be Harold's kids, he said, voice calm, warm like embers. Mary nodded slowly. You're Owen. He smiled faintly. That's right, coming out of the cold. I've been expecting you. The cabin smelled of pine, smoke, and cinnamon. On the table, near the fire, sat a plate of sliced fruitcake, a knife beside it, 2 mugs of tea steaming gently. Daniel Staredinu and shrugged. Your father said you would. Maybe not right away, but eventually. He said once you read his letters, you'd want to understand. Mary sat down slowly, eyes scanning the walls lined with wooden carvings, birdhouses, framed photos of places that didn't look familiar. But there, on the mantel, was one picture that made her breath catch. Her father, younger but smiling, standing beside Owen in front of the garage. Both of them dusted in sawdust and grease, holding a half-eaten fruitcake between them like a trophy. Owen followed her gaze. That was the first one, he said softly. He hated it. Said it tasted like sadness and raisins. Mary laughed through the tears welling up. Daniel stayed standing, arms crossed, watching Owen carefully. Why'd he leave it all to you? Owen met his eyes without flinching. Because I didn't ask for it. And because he wanted you both to see that money can't buy what he owed you, he pushed the plate of fruitcake toward them. He told me to share this with you. When you came, Daniel hesitated. Mary reached for a piece first. Took a bite. It was dense, too sweet, imperfect. But as the flavor settled, something stirred inside her chest. It tasted like memory. Like un no. Whispered against the windows that night, like the past itself, was breathing just outside. The lake beyond the glass shimmered under the moon, a sheet of silver ice, still and hauntingly familiar. Mary sat by the fire, with her knees pulled up, her father's old flannel draped around her shoulders, while Daniel paced slowly, the creak of the wooden floorboards echoing with every step. Neither spoke for a long time. Words felt too heavy, too small for what hung between them. The fruitcake sat on the table, uncut, a silent sentinel to everything they'd lost and everything they were only now beginning to find. When Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice was low, brittle. I used to think he hated us. Mary looked up, startled. He kept his gaze on the flames. After Mom left, I convinced myself he stopped caring. It was easier that way. Anger's always easier than grief. Marilyn shed Daniel Wenon. But standing here now, it's like he never stopped waiting. Every little thing in this place hits him. The repairs, the firewood, even the tea in the cupboard. He was keeping it ready. For us, Mary nodded slowly. He didn't know how to say sorry, so he built it instead. Daniel laughed softly. He was better with tools than words. A pause. The can Marie say did actually come? He turned toward her, eyes tired but gentle. He knew you would. Me? I'm not so sure. She smiled faintly. Maybe he knew we'd need each other to get. Here, outside, the wind moaned through the trees, a lonely, beautiful sound. Mary got up, walked to the window, and pressed her hand against the cold glass. You remember when we used to skate out there? She asked. He'd make cocoa, and Mum would play that awful Bing Crosby record until we begged her to stop. Daniel's lips quirked. Yeah, and you'd always fall through the ice near the dock. I did that on purpose, she said, grinning. He'd come running every time. He thought he was rescuing me, but I just liked how he'd carry me back. The memory hit them both like warmth, an ache tangled together. Then Mary turned serious. I think he was trying to rescue us too, in his own way. Daniel frowned. By making us chase a fruitcake, she met his gaze. No, by making us come back here, together, he sighed, sinking into a chair. You really think this was all some grand plan? I don't think he planned it, she said. I think he hoped for it. Her eyes drifted toward the small wooden box they'd brought from Owen's cabin. It no saton. The mantel, beside the framed photo of their parents. Something about it felt unfinished, like it wasn't done speaking. Mary stood and opened it again. Inside, beneath the note and the key, she noticed a thin, false bottom barely visible under the soft wood grain. She pried at it gently until it lifted free. A small envelope lay hidden beneath. She froze. Daniel. He stood, instantly alert. What is it? She pulled it out with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed, slightly, older than the first letters. Written across the front, in neat, slanted ink were the words, "For when you finally forgive me." Her throat tightened. She opened it carefully, unfolding the single page inside. Her father's handwriting filled it steady. Deliberat. My children, if you've found this, then you've already come farther than I ever deserved. I kept this from you because I wasn't sure I'd earned the right for you to read it. I know I failed your mother. I know I failed you. I spent too many years trying to fix my mistakes with things instead of time. But Owen had love isn't even gestures. It's about showing up, even when you think it's too late. This cabin was our best days. Every nail I replaced, every board I sanded, it was me trying to keep those days alive, hoping you'd walk through that door again. If you're here, it means you did, and that's enough for me. That's home. There's a tin under the floorboards near the fireplace. It's yours. Dad Mary's breath hitched. She looked up, eyes wide. There's something here. Daniel was already moving, pulling the old rug aside and prying up a loose plank with the poker. Beneath it lay a small metal tin, rusted but intact. He pulled it free and set it on the table. They hoped they were frozen enough tem. Their childhood birthdays, family picnics, Christmas mornings. But also newer ones. Pictures of the garage rebuilt, the lake frozen over, Owen grinning beside their father. And in each, tucked behind, were notes. Little scraps of paper with simple lines. Mary's favorite song. Played on the radio today. Daniel's old baseball glove still hangs in the shed. Made another. Fruitcake this one. Might actually be edible. Each note was a moment small. Human. Tender. Proof that he had never stopped thinking about them. Mary wept silently. Daniel sat back, the tin clutched in his lap, his face hidden behind his hand. After a long moment, whispered Alzheimer. I thought he forgot us. Mary shook her head. He remembered every single day. They went through every photo, every note, until the fire burned low and the first light of morning slipped through the curtains. When they finally stepped outside, the snow had stopped. The lake was still, a perfect mirror of the pale pink sky. Daniel stood at the edge, hands in his pockets. Think he'd want us to keep coming back. Mary smiled softly. No, he'd want us to live. But I think he'd like knowing this place isn't empty anymore. Daniel nodded. We'll fix it up. Keep it standing. She glanced toward the SUV. The fruitcake still sat on the front seat, untouched. Let's take it with us, she said. Daniel smirked. To do what? Start our own cursed holiday tradition. Maybe. Her eyes shone with quiet resolve. Maybe next Christmas we send one to Owen. Daniel chuckled. And after that, she looked out at the glimmering ice. After that, maybe we send one to someone else who needs to remember. The wind picked up, carrying the faint chime of the porch bell. For a fleeting moment, Daniel swore he heard his father's laugh in the soundworm, distant, proud. As they drove away, the cabin grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but the light from its window stayed bright against the snow until it was gone. And somewhere in that fading glow, the ghosts of the past finally found their peace. A year passed before either of them spoke of the cabin again. Life, as it always does, began to move forward slowly at first, then with the relentless hum of the ordinary. Daniel returned to Boston, back to his finance firm, where his days were measured in spreadsheets and deadlines. Mary stayed in Vermont, teaching art at the same small-town school their father once volunteered to fix the roof for. But something had changed in both of them. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like the way light changes when clouds drift apart. Every so often, Mary would receive a letter from Owen, always short, always on cream paper, written in that neat, steady hand. Each one contained a few words, and sometimes a photograph. The lake froze early this year. Reminded me of him. Built another birdhouse. Used the last of your dad's old nails. Fruitcakes in the mail. And sure enough, each December, a package would arrive on her porch wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Daniel never mentioned if he got one too. But Mary suspected he did. It was on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year, since the reading of the will, that Daniel finally called her. His voice was calm, but softer than she remembered. You up at the cabin? Marie Smailed. She was standing by the fire, watching the snow fall through the window. Yeah, just got here an hour ago. Good, he said, and she could hear the faint sound of the city behind him, traffic, horns, the muted hum of winter bustle. Mind if I come up? She laughed. You're asking now. It's a 4-hour drive. Done. I know. He hesitated. But I've got something I should bring. He didn't explain, and she didn't ask. The key's where it's always been, she said. When he arrived just past midnight, the world outside was still a deep, crystalline quiet. He came in stamping, snow off his boots, holding a small box wrapped in paper that looked suspiciously familiar. Mary raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. He grinned. Don't start. It's homemade, she laughed, taking the box from him and placing it beside the fire. You actually baked one. Tried to, he said, shrugging off his coat. Owen sent me a recipe. Said it was time to stop eating my father's fruitcakes and start making my own. Mary's laughter softened into something gentler. That sounds like him. Daniel sat down heavily, stretching his legs toward the hearth. He came by the city last week. Brought one of his birdhouses to my office. You should have seen security's face when he walked in with that thing under his arm. Mary smiled. What did you do? I invited him to lunch. He talked about Dad the whole time. Her expression grew quiet. You're still angry, aren't you? He considered it for a moment, the fire flickering in his eyes. He admitted. But I think I finally get it now. The money, the will. It wasn't a punishment, it was a test. Mary frowned. A test of what? To see if we could remember who we were before everything fell apart. They sat there for a long time, the fire crackling, the smell of pine and cinnamon wrapping around them. Outside, the snow deepened, muting the world into stillness. Eventually, Daniel stood. You want to see something? He went out to the car and came back holding a folded tarp. When he unrolled it, Mary gasped. Beneath it was a wooden sign, hand-carved with careful precision. The Daniels Works 1983 rebuild-to-5. You rebuilt it. Rebuild it. Owen helped. I took a leave from work for a few months. Thought maybe I could finish what? He started. Her eyes glistened. Dad would have loved that. He smiled. That's the point. They carried the sign outside together, the air crisp and bright with the smell of pine. Snowflakes drifted, like ashes. Daniel hammered the post into the ground near the porch. When he stepped back, Mary whispered, "Welcome home, Dad," and for a moment, just a fleeting one, they both felt it. A warmth that didn't come from the fire. The next morning, the lake shimmered under a thin sheet of glassy ice. The world was silent, except for the soft scrape of metal on wood as Daniel and Mary cleared the porch steps. They found a small envelope taped to the front door, no stamps, no footprints leading to it, as though it had appeared on its own. Mary's breath caught as she recognized the handwriting. Merry Christmas, kids! Thought you might need one more for the road. Inside was a fruitcake, smaller this time, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a faded red ribbon. Daniel held it for a moment before laughing under his breath. He's never going to let this die, is he? Mary grinned. Good, it means we're still remembered. They took it down to the frozen lake, setting it gently on the dock. The wind stirred their hair, the sunlight catching on the ripples frozen beneath the surface. Daniel crouched and whispered, "Thanks, Dad." Then, together, they pushed the fruitcake out across the ice. It slid until it came to rest at the center of the lake, a small brown shape against the endless white. And for the first time in a long, long while, they didn't feel haunted anymore. That night, as the siblings sat watching the fire fade, Mary looked over at her brother. "You think Owen will keep sending them?" Daniel shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe he's done his part." She smiled. "Then maybe it's our turn." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Mary stood, went to her bag, and pulled out a small stack of envelopes, each one blank, waiting to remember someone else. She began writing the first address, a single mother from her class whose son had lost his father that year. Then another for Daniel's assistant, who'd spent every Christmas alone since her parents passed. Daniel watched her, realization dawning like sunlight over frost. "You're serious?" She nodded. "We'll send them a note and a fruitcake. Every year." He chuckled. "The family curse continues." Mary smiled through her tears. "No, Dawn, the family tradition." And as snow fell softly outside, the two of them sat at that table, surrounded by warmth, laughter, and the faint scent of cinnamon. Their father had left them many things: regret, lessons, memories. But the greatest of all, he might been when lat could steal paper, tied with twine and shared once a year, with those who needed to remember. They weren't forgotten. The fire crackled. The letters piled high. And somewhere beyond the lake, beneath the whisper of the wind, the world felt just a little bit lighter. The following spring, the lake thawed early. The ice that had mirrored the winter sky only months before melted into rippling blue. And the forest came alive again the way it had in those childhood summers when the Daniels family was whole. Mary spent most weekends at the cabin now, painting in the mornings and fixing what time had loosened in the afternoons. She'd found her father's old workbench in the shed, covered in sawdust and oil stains, and had cleaned it so carefully it almost looked new. Daniel visited more often, too. Sometimes he came for a day, sometimes a week. Each visit seemed to pull another layer of distance away from him, his expensive shoes collecting mud, his phone left forgotten in the truck. The siblings had begun to find something like peace there. But neither of them expected what arrived that May morning. Mary was kneeling in the garden, her hands buried in the soil, when she saw the truck bumping up the narrow path through the trees. A familiar, one rusty blue, its bumper held together with wire. She stood, wiping her hands on her jeans as Owen stepped out. He looked older, she thought, or maybe just tired. But his eyes were still all the same. Warm, clear, the kind that saw more than they said. "Owen," she said, smiling. "You found us, my led back." "Never lost you." Daniel came out of the cabin, squinting against the light. "Thought you weren't traveling through Snowstrop, wenchek." "I brought something different this time." He went to the back of the truck, lifted a wooden crate, and set it on the porch. Inside were small saplings, their roots wrapped in burlap. "Apple trees," he said. "Your father and I planted one by the lake years ago." "Thought you might want to finish what we started." Mary's voice softened. "You mean the one near the dock?" "The one that never grew right?" Owen nodded. "The soil wasn't ready back then." "Maybe it is now." They spent the rest of the day planting them 6 in total, spaced neatly along the gentle slope that led down to the water. The smell of earth and spring rain filled the air. As the sun dipped low, Owen stood quietly by the water's edge, his reflection trembling in the ripples. Daniel joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You know," Daniel said after a moment, "I was angry at you for a long time. I thought you stole something from us." Owen took the cup without surprise. "And now?" Daniel stared out at the lake. "Now I think you gave something back." Owen smiled faintly. "He wanted you to have a chance to forgive him. I just kept the lights on until you did." They stood in silence for a while, the water catching the last glints of light. Then Mary's voice called from the porch, "Dinner's ready." "And before you ask, yes, there's fruitcake for dessert." Owen laughed, shaking his head. "I should have known." That night, after they'd eaten and the fire had burned down to embers, Owen reached into his jacket and pulled out a letter. It was sealed with wax familiar, handwriting looping across the front. Daniel frowned. "Is that?" Owen nodded. "He wrote it before he passed. Told me to give it to you when the lake thawed." Mary took it with trembling fingers and opened it carefully. The letter inside was short, the ink slightly faded but legible. "My children, if this held only peace." In the flicker of firelight, the old cabin seemed to hum alive, eternal, and remembered. That winter felt like an ending and a beginning, folded together, the kind of seesaw end that carried ghosts gently. The way snow holds the sound of footsteps for only a moment before erasing them. Mary woke early most mornings, before the house stirred. The cabin was never truly silent anymore. The walls seemed to breathe with the laughter of children, the echo of hammering from Daniel's workshop, the rhythmic creak of the wind through the apple trees. But in those grey hours before dawn, she could still feel her father, his quiet presence in the crackle of the fire. The soft scent of wood smoke, the echo of a life repaired one act of love at a time. She would make tea, sit. Bizuindong out at the lake. It had frozen over again, a perfect mirror of the sky. And at the far end, where the ice met the woods, stood the oldest of the apple trees, the one they'd planted with Owen that first spring. Its branches were bare now, Starkel herens the pringed genitalwidid. One morning, Lucy joined her. The girl had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's curiosity. She sat quietly, sipping cocoa, legs swinging over the edge of the armchair. "Grandma," she said after a while, "why do we always make those fruitcakes?" Mary smiled. She'd been waiting for that question. "Because someone once did something kind for someone else, and they decided to remember it every year." Lucy wrinkled her nose. "But nobody even likes fruitcake." Mary laughed softly. "That's not the point. It's not about liking it. It's about remembering." Lucy thought about that, brow furrowed in serious concentration. Remembering what? Mary looked back out at the lake. "That love can look like small things. A letter, a visit, a gift that makes you smile, even if it's terrible to eat." Lucy giggled. "So, it's like a really bad tradition that's actually good." "Exactly," Mary said, ruffling her hair. "It's a reminder that people can change, and that it's never too late to tell someone you love them." Lucy nodded, satisfied, and hopped down from the chair. "Can I help make them this year?" Mary smiled, her eyes glistening. "I was hoping you'd ask." By afternoon, the kitchen was chaos. Flour on the counter, raisins rolling onto the floor, the scent of sugar and cinnamon thick in the air. Lucy stirred the batter with exaggerated effort, her tongue poking out in concentration. Daniel walked in, dusted with sawdust, a pencil tucked behind his ear. "I smell trouble," he said, grinning. "Fruitcake day," Mary replied. Lucy's taking over the legacy, Daniel chuckled. Dad would be proud. He always said the only thing tougher than forgiveness was baking one of those without setting it on fire. Mary laughed, passing him a spoon. Taste test. He obliged, grimaced, and nodded approvingly. Yep, still awful. Lucy giggled. Grandpa would have liked it. Daniel looked at her, something tender flickering behind his eyes. Yeah, he said softly. He would have. They baked until dusk, the kitchen glowing gold in the fading light. When the cakes were done, Mary wrapped them carefully brown paper, twine, and a handwritten note tucked into each one. Lucy helped write the words, her small letters looping unevenly across the page. From the Daniels family, remember, someone this Christmas. They boxed 12 of them, as had become tradition. Half would go to neighbors. The rest would be sent to strangers' names Mary gathered through quiet conversations in town. Widows. Retirees. A young teacher who'd just lost. Her husband, a mechanic who spent holidays alone. The fruitcakes would arrive, without explanation, except for that note. That night, after the last package was sealed, Mary stepped outside alone. The sky stretched black and endless, pierced with stars. The snow was deep, untouched, the kind that muffled even her breath. She walked to the apple trees. Their branches shivered. Faintly, in the breeze, whispering the stories they'd grown up listening to. At the base of the oldest tree, she knelt. There, half buried in frost, was a small wooden plaque. The letters had faded over time, but she could still read them. For Harold, who remembered too late, but loved forever. She brushed the snow away gently. We did it. Dad, she whispered. You can rest now. For a moment, the wind. Stilled. The air went utterly still, and she could almost hear his quiet laugh, the scrape of his boots on the porch, his voice saying her name the way only a father can. Then, from the cabin behind her, came the sound of laughter, Daniel's deep and easy, Lucy's bright and pure. Mary smiled, standing. She turned back toward the house, where light glowed warm and golden against the snow. As well, Dad. Changed, and so had she. Grief had become memory, memory had become tradition, and tradition somehow had become joy. Years later, when Mary was gone and the cabin belonged to Lucy, the fruitcake still came. Every Christmas Eve, without fail, a small package appeared on the porch wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Lucy never figured out who sent them. She didn't need to. She would open them, smile, and slice a piece for whoever was there that year, her children. Her friends, the neighbors who'd become family. And every time she took that first bite, she would think of the stories her grandmother told the lake. The cabin, the man who left everything to a stranger so his children could find each other again. One night, many winters later, as she watched the snow fall over the frozen lake, she whispered the same words her grandmother once had. It's not about the cake. It's about remembering. Outside, the apple trees. Bent gently in the wind, their branches heavy with snow. Inside, the cabin glowed with laughter, the scent of cinnamon and sugar filling the air. And somewhere between the flicker of firelight and the hush of falling snow, the memory of Harold Daniels. Owen Reeve, and every act of kindness that followed lived quietly on, unbroken, eternal. The lake glittered under a fresh fall of snow, every branch of the old apple trees bowed beneath white weight. The cabin stood there, timeless, its roof patched and repatched, the porch rail smoothed by the touch of 3 generations of hands. Inside, the sound of music floated from a small speaker, something old, something soft. Lucy hummed along as she rolled out parchment paper on the counter. The tradition had long since grown beyond the family. Now, every December, she gathered a handful of volunteers from town neighbors. Students, even the mail carrier to bake and wrap fruitcakes for anyone who might need a reminder that they were remembered. This year, a boy named Eli was helping. A 12 lanky and of child, who carried the watchful silence of someone who'd lost too much too young. Lucy had met him through her art program at the school. His father had died that spring. She slid a mixing bowl toward him. You're the chief raisin stirrer today. He gave a tiny smile. Is that an actual job? The most important one. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Eli asked, why do you do this? Evrier? Everyone in town says the fruitcakes come from you, but you never tell anyone why. Lucy paused, wiping flour from her hands. The smell of cinnamon and orange peel filled the room. Because a long time ago, someone forgot how to say sorry, she said, and someone else forgave him. Anyway, they started a promise to keep remembering. I'm just keeping it alive. He looked at her thoughtfully. Even if nobody remembers why. Especially then. Outside, the wind brushed the windows, the kind of whispering sound that made the whole cabin seem alive. Lucy glanced toward the old mantel. The same photo had sat there for nearly 60 years. Her great-grandfather Harold, his friend Owen, and a half-eaten fruitcake between them. Every time she looked at it, she swore. Smiles in the picture seemed a little warmer. By evening, the kitchen was a battlefield of crumbs and laughter. Dozens of cakes cooled on the counter, each one imperfect in its own way. Lucy showed Eli how to wrap them brown paper, tied with twine, and a small card tucked underneath. He watched her write the words in neat cursive. From the Daniels family, remember, someone this Christmas. Efroned. But my name's not Daniels. Lucy smiled. It doesn't have to be. The moment you send one, you are. He thought about that, then nodded slowly. Together, they packed the boxes into the back of her truck. The plan was to deliver half around town before midnight. But there was one they always left for last, the one meant for the lake. When the deliveries were done and the town square lights had gone dim, Lucy and Ely returned to the frozen shore. The air was sharp, crystalline, full of stars. She set the last fruitcake on the dock, its paper catching the moonlight. This one's for them, she said softly. For who? For everyone who started this. For everyone who remembered. They slid the cake out across the ice. It skimmed smooth and silent until it stopped at the lake center. Eli whispered, "Do you think they can see it?" Lucy smiled. "I think they never stopped watching." The wind rose then, carrying the faint sound of chimes from the porch. The same melody that had once rung when Harold Daniels walked these boards. Years later, when Lucy herself had gone grey, the cabin still stood, and every December, light still glowed in its windows. Eli, grown now, returned each Christmas Eve, sometimes alone, sometimes with his own children. The boxes were smaller, these days recipes simplified, notes shorter, but the meaning was unchanged. People still found packages on their porches, brown paper, twine, and the same message in a dozen careful hands. One night, after delivering the last of them, Eli sat on the dock with his daughter. Snow was falling thick, quiet, endless. "Dad," she asked, "why do we send these cakes to people we don't know?" He looked out at the lake, at the faint outline of the apple trees against the sky. "Because somebody once did it for us. And because every time we do, we remember them." She nestled against him. "But who were they?" He smiled, eyes soft. "A family, a stranger, a promise." They sat in silence as the snow covered the dock, the cake resting far out on the ice. Above them, the cabin windows glowed like lanterns in the dark. Inside, on the mantel, the photograph remained. Two men, a cake, and the start of something that had outlasted them all. And in that stillness somewhere, between memory and eternity, the story of Harold Daniels, his children, and the man who saved him lived on, not as legend or obligation, but as something far simpler. A quiet act of love, passed forward forever. The next morning, light spilled across the lake like liquid gold. The snow that had fallen overnight shimmered untouched, and the apple trees stood motionless, ancient guardians over generations of memories. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, its embers glowing softly in the hearth. The walls were lined with photographs, now decades of faces smiling, back at time. Harold and Ellen, Daniel and Mary, Owen, Lucy, Eli, each one a chapter in the same story that had started with a stranger's kindness and a father's redemption. Eli stood by the window, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the sun rise over the lake. His daughter still slept upstairs, the faint sound of her breathing mingling with the crackle of the last log in the fire. The Fruitcake they had left on the ice was gone, taken by the thaw or by the lake itself, as it always was. But that didn't matter. He turned toward the mantel. The old photograph had faded now, its corners curled with age. Harold Daniels' grin had softened into something ghostly, but his eyes the eyes of a man who had once been lost and found still gleamed with warmth. Eli raised his mug slightly, a quiet toast. "You did it," he murmured. "You really did." Outside, the ice began to crack tiny, whispering fractures that signaled spring's return. The world was thawing again, just as it always had. He sat down at the table, where the same worn recipe card lay framed under glass. The handwriting, faded but legible, read, Fruitcake heralds way a reminder. Once a year, that forgiveness lasts longer than grief. He smiled. The door creaked open then, and his daughter appeared, still half asleep. "Morning," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, kiddo," Eli said. She looked around the cabin, the fire, the photos, the quiet hum of something old and sacred. "Are we making them again? Next year?" Eli nodded. "Always," she smiled, the kind of pure, honest smile that could light a cold morning. 10. We'll never forget. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's the point. They sat together in silence as the sun climbed higher, the light spilling through the windows and catching on the dust like stars. Outside, the apple trees stirred in the warming wind, their branches swaying gently as if waving to every soul that had ever passed through this story. And for a moment, a quiet, perfect moment, the entire world seemed to breathe in unison. The cabin, the lake, the fruitcakes, the laughter, the forgiveness, the love, all of it had become something eternal. No longer a memory, no longer a debt. Juste à l'égalité as waiting in perfection. The last embers flickered out. Of Handuit I nearly came. To rest, not with an ending, but with peace. Passed forward forever. The next morning, light spilled across the lake like liquid gold. The snow that had fallen overnight shimmered untouched, and the apple trees stood motionless, ancient guardians over generations of memories. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, its embers glowing softly in the hearth. The walls were lined with photographs, now decades of faces smiling back at time. Harold and Ellen, Daniel and Mary, Owen, Lucy, Eli, each one a chapter in the same story that had started with a stranger's kindness and a father's redemption. Eli stood by the window, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the sun rise over the lake. His daughter still slept upstairs, the faint sound of her breathing mingling with the crackle of the last log in the fire. The fruitcake they had left on the ice was gone, taken by the thaw or by the lake itself, as it always was. But that didn't matter. He turned toward the mantel. The old photograph had faded now, its corners curled with age. Harold Daniel's grin had softened into something ghostly, but his eyes, the eyes of a man who had once been lost and found, still gleamed with warmth. Eli raised his mug slightly, a quiet toast. "You did it," he murmured. "You really did." Outside, the ice began to crack, tiny, whispering fractures that signaled spring's return. The world was thawing again, just as it always had. He sat down at the table, where the same worn recipe card lay framed under glass. The handwriting, faded but legible, read, Fruitcake heralds way a reminder, once a year, that forgiveness lasts longer than grief. He smiled. The door creaked open then, and his daughter appeared, still half asleep. "Morning," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, kiddo," Eli said. She looked around the cabin, the fire, the photos, the quiet hum of something old and sacred. "Are we making them again? Next year?" Eli nodded. "Always." She smiled, the kind of pure, honest smile that could light a cold morning. 10. We'll never forget. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's the point. They sat together in silence as the sun climbed higher, the light spilling through the windows and catching on the dust like stars. Outside, the apple trees stirred in the warming wind, their branches swaying gently as if waving to every soul that had ever passed through this story. And for a moment, a quiet, perfect moment, the entire world seemed to breathe in unison. The cabin, the lake, the fruitcakes, the laughter, the forgiveness, the love, all of it had become something eternal. No longer a memory, no longer a debt. Juste à l'égalité as waiting in perfection. The last embers flickered out. Of Handuit I nearly came. To rest, not with an ending, but with peace. Passed forward forever. The next morning, light spilled across the lake like liquid gold. The snow that had fallen overnight shimmered untouched, and the apple trees stood motionless, ancient guardians over generations of memories. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, its embers glowing softly in the hearth. The walls were lined with photographs, now decades of faces smiling back at time. Harold and Ellen, Daniel and Mary, Owen, Lucy, Eli, each one a chapter in the same story that had started with a stranger's kindness and a father's redemption. Eli stood by the window, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the sun rise over the lake. His daughter still slept upstairs, the faint sound of her breathing mingling with the crackle of the last log in the fire. The fruitcake they had left on the ice was gone, taken by the thaw or by the lake itself, as it always was. But that didn't matter. He turned toward the mantel. The old photograph had faded now, its corners curled with age. Harold Daniels' grin had softened into something ghostly. "Toast! You did it!" he murmured. "You really did." Outside, the ice began to crack tiny, whispering fractures that signaled spring's return. The world was thawing again, just as it always had. He sat down at the table, where the same worn recipe card lay framed under glass. The handwriting, faded but legible, read, "Fruitcake heralds way a reminder, once a year, that forgiveness lasts longer than grief." He smiled. The door creaked open then, and his daughter appeared, still half asleep. "Morning," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, kiddo," Eli said. She looked around the cabin, the fire, the photos, the quiet hum of something old and sacred. "Are we making them again? Next year?" Eli nodded. "Always." She smiled. "The kind of pure, mild, the cold morning. Then we'll never forget." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's the point." They sat together in silence as the sun climbed higher, the light spilling through the windows and catching on the dust like stars. Outside, the apple trees stirred in the warming wind, their branches swaying gently, as if waving to every soul that had ever passed through this story. And for a moment, a quiet, perfect moment, the entire world seemed to breathe in unison. The cabin, the lake, the fruitcakes, the laughter, the forgiveness, the love, all of it had become something eternal. No longer a memory, no longer a debt. Just a legacy soft as snow, steady as spring, and sweet in its imperfection. The last embers flickered out. "Oh, you've hand wheat stored," and Lily came. "Toast! You did it!" he murmured. "You really did." Outside, the ice began to crack tiny, whispering fractures that signaled spring's return. The world was thawing again, just as it always had. He sat down at the table, where the same worn recipe card lay framed under glass. The handwriting, faded but legible, read, "Fruitcake heralds way a reminder, once a year, that forgiveness lasts longer than grief." He smiled. The door creaked open then, and his daughter appeared, still half asleep. "Morning," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, kiddo," Eli said. She looked around the cabin, the fire, the photos, the quiet hum of something old and sacred. "Are we making them again? Next year?" Eli nodded. "Always." She smiled. "The kind of pure, mild, the cold morning. Then we'll never forget." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's the point. They sat together in silence as the sun climbed higher, the light spilling through the windows and catching on the dust like stars. Outside, the apple trees stirred in the warming wind, their branches swaying gently, as if waving to every soul that had ever passed through this story. And for a moment, a quiet, perfect moment, the entire world seemed to breathe in unison. The cabin, the lake, the fruitcakes, the laughter, the forgiveness, the love, all of it had become something eternal. No longer a memory, no longer a debt. Just a legacy soft as snow, steady as spring, and sweet in its imperfection. The last embers flickered out. Und we tempt the start of heimlichen ending, but with peace. Little like forgiveness. Mary's laugh lingered in the air, awkward, uncertain, and fragile. Astug Shuddi stumbled into moment pure for the bitterness that had lived in her chest for years. Daniel didn't laugh. He was pacing near the door, jaw tight, phone already, in hand. "I'm calling the estate attorney again," he muttered, thumb tapping angrily. "There's no way this holds up in court. A stranger doesn't just get $15 million because Dad got sentimental at the end." Mary didn't look up. Her fingers brushed the edge of the fruitcake like it was a live wire. "You think he'd really do this just to hurt us?" Daniel turned, voice rising. "He already did. Mom begged him to get help, remember? He drove her away. He drove us away." His voice cracked. "And now he's, what? Teaching us a lesson from the grave." The lawyer, Mr. Preston, coughed softly. "Mr. Daniels, the will was legally verified, notarized, and witnessed by two parties. Your father was of sound mind when he signed it." The condition regarding Mr. Reeve is unconventional, yes, a shiny glove to glass. Sound mind. He left millions to a carpenter. He met 30 years ago. Mary finally stood. She wasn't as loud, but there was something in her eyes, an old pain, dimmed but not gone. Maybe he just left it to the only person who didn't want anything from him. That silenced the room. Even Preston paused, pen frozen above the paperwork. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, a quiet, endless drift that made the window panes hum. Mary picked up the note again, reading the words like they were a code. From your father, with love. She looked at her brother. He didn't even sign his name. Just that. Daniel rubbed his face, frustration radiating from him. We can't just accept this. We're his kids. He didn't even try to make peace with us before. He tried. Mary interrupted, softly. You just didn't pick up the phone. Daniel froze. The accusation was soft but lethal. Mary continued, voice trembling now. He called me last year. I didn't answer either. It was Christmas Eve, and I thought, what could he possibly want after all this time? She blinked, fighting the tears that burned her throat. Maybe just to send us one more fruitcake. Preston cleared his throat. Tereos. One more thing, he said, pulling out a sealed manila envelope. Mr. Daniels requested that I deliver this directly to you both today. Daniel snatched it first, tearing it open. Sighted fall dead net leaking their father. He handed one to Mary, without a word. Mary's fingers shook as she unfolded hers. My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, it means I'm finally where the noise can't reach me anymore. I never stopped thinking about you or your brother. I know I lost your mother's trust, and yours followed soon after. I don't blame you. But I want you to know something simple. Owen reminded me what decency looks like. What?